I grew up in a rural area, before California, and the property of my house backed up to an open hill full of deer, mountain lions, etc. Supposedly the house was the pool house for the servant's house. I know, right, I guess that's a thing. There are really only a few things you should know about the house. It's shaped like a capital L. My younger brother and I stayed at the room at the top of the L. The top of the L, my room, was like the closest to the unlit street, and the furthest from my parents' room. The house is single story, with a basement, unusual for California. So before I get into the stories, I do want to note that I often write off some of my experiences because I was a young child in an old house with plenty of old noises, and, as I mentioned, my room was furthest from my parents' room, adding to a sense of isolation and fear of being far from the safety we often get from our parents. Number 1. One night, my brother, 10, and I, 12, woke up to a noise outside our room. At first it was muffled, maybe an animal, which wasn't strange for the rural area we lived. Suddenly it was clear to me what we were hearing. Someone outside was yelling, "Help me!" After hearing it a few more times, I spoke quietly to my brother on the top bunk. "Did you hear that? It sounds like someone is saying." And he completed my sentence, "Help me." With this confirmation that my consistently overactive imagination wasn't messing with me, we both yelled out for my father. He ran back to our room as quickly as he could, where he sat with us for at least half an hour. We didn't hear the voice again. He went outside and searched around the yard and couldn't find anything. Aside from randomly hearing noises or my name, this was the only auditory experience I've had in the house. Though on another night a few years earlier, something ran into the outside wall of our room with enough force to shake us awake. We again yelled out. My dad searched outside. Nothing was found. He assured us it was an ill deer and sent us back to sleep. Number 2. When I was in my teen years, I began to practice guitar. Because I wasn't very good, my family suggested I practice in the basement, for their own peace and quiet. The basement at the time was unfinished. The ground was cement, and 3/4 of the walls were cement. The last quarter of the walls were open to dirt. Intermittently, the dirt would open up to a tunnel, about 4 feet in diameter. This was the access to the crawl space beneath the house, but I never fully explored them. The basement was often the cause of chills and the hair on my neck standing on end, but one night was particularly rattling. I was sitting on a chair practicing my guitar when an indelible image entered my mind. In my head, I saw a man hanging from the unfinished ceiling above me. It was as if I could see myself from his eyes, looking down on me playing guitar. I knew there was a noose around his neck, though I did not see it. The terror I felt in that moment was completely irrational. I don't think there could have been many moments that I have felt more scared than I did in that instant, but it was completely unexplained. Without turning around and leaving all my equipment on the ground, I ran from the basement. Number 3. We used to screen our calls, because that was a thing back then. So one night, my mother, sister, younger brother, and I are watching TV, and we let the phone ring through to the answering machine. As my dad's cheery voice finishes his pre-recorded message, a deep, gravelly voice comes from the machine.
"You'll all die tonight."
My mother quickly picked up the phone and hung up. After she calmed us down, she explained it was a prank call, most likely from a friend of my older brother, or even my brother and father themselves. When they got home later, we tried to laugh at the message and blame it on them. They swore it wasn't them. That night, my young sister was scared. She decided it was a good idea to cover the lamp on her nightstand with a towel. It burned a little, but set the smoke alarm off, and we were able to run in and put it out quickly. I know a little about the family that lived in the house before me, and my family still lives in the house now. I try to stay skeptical for most of this stuff, but I've had a decent number of smaller incidents than those above. This story is not creepy or horrifying, but rather bizarre, random, albeit it does have a paranormal aspect, I think. It took place in Austria, in the Upper Austria region, way out in the countryside. But I don't want to disclose anything more specific, given the people involved, out of privacy reasons. In any case, it should suffice to say that Austria is a Catholic alpine country, with lots of superstition and legends. So between 2008 and 2012, when I was in my teens, I very frequently hung out with my then best friend on the weekends, and together, with a group of around 5 other close friends, we spent a lot of time in this lovely old flat owned by his grandfather, a retired headmaster. My mate's grandpa lived somewhere else though, and hardly used his old flat anymore, but continued to pay the rent in order to enable his son to use it as a weekend party home. It was furnished in 1970s style, but still in good shape. Me and my friend refurbished it a bit by installing some modern TV sets and gaming consoles. We frequently slept over, playing video games until late at night, drinking, eating tons of junk food, and doing whatever teenagers do at that age. The flat was part of the old school building, built circa 1875, where my friend's grandpa used to teach until the 1990s, before his retirement. The school itself, a kind of boarding school, was still operative at the time, and the school grounds included several other buildings, including a medieval manor built around 1200, which housed some 200 students. Due to the age of the estate and its somewhat sinister interior, it even had this long, spooky underground tunnel connecting it to the local church. There were countless rumors of ghosts, which were spread by the students who lived there throughout the work week. We were aware of these tales through our casual interaction with the students. Anyways, we didn't really take the spooky stories serious, and mainly used them as the butt of many jokes, frequently directed at the youngest member of our crew, who was relatively fearful and credulous and believed in the paranormal. For example, there was this rather ridiculous story about Dogman, a kind of humanoid canine who peered through windows and walked the school's corridors at night, to punish students who defied the school's policy of a 9 p.m. bedtime. In fact, it probably originated from the fact that, at the time, the headmaster of the school had several large black dogs who roamed around the school grounds freely and, despite never getting physically aggressive, barked at students who teased them and sometimes chased them around, even following them into the school buildings once. There were some other stories too, that were more substantial. Naturally, many people believed that there was a Hausgeist, an old spirit attached to the place, haunting the school grounds and especially the manor. In the building where my friends and I had resided, there were some strange occurrences that might give credit to this story. Late one night, we would sometimes hear someone hammering at the main door of the building, but we always thought of it as a prank committed by students. A few times, though, we also heard knocks at the flat's own door, despite the main door downstairs being locked. However, these knocks were more gentle and sounded like someone was politely seeking entrance, so we weren't really scared. We were more creeped out by the chain rattling in the hall at 2 a.m. we thought we had heard every other night. But we concluded that it was a background noise in the video game we had been playing all night. When looking out the window, we could see the main school buildings. And as we always stayed up late until 3 or 4 a.m., we could see lights in the manner where there really should be none at this ungodly time, including classrooms and attic. These would randomly switch on and off throughout the night, but there were never any more than 3 or 4 illuminated windows at once. The light behind the windows was of shimmering, candle-like glow, and did not look as if it was coming from an electric source. Of course, it could have been students, again, secretly exploring the creepy building at night. But this also happened at weekends. Some students told us that the same could be observed from their windows when looking back at our flat sometime during school days, when we were not even there. As we spent more and more time there, the housegeist apparently began to fuck with us more and more. Above our flat, there were old dorm rooms that were fully equipped but no longer in use. When they weren't locked, we would sometimes get up there and play billiard at the table the former inhabitants had left there. So not only did we hear footsteps from above despite knowing that the dorm rooms were uninhabited, but also the characteristic sound of someone actually using the cue stick to move the balls. Although it stopped when we turned off the TV to listen more closely. The ghost, if it was one, also seemed to enjoy spoiling our video gaming at times, as the internet would sometimes abruptly stop working. This was not uncommon in general, but it very frequently did so when we were close to victory in some epic online battle or Wi-Fi Mario Kart race, adding up to a pattern that was too obvious to ignore. On the other hand, one of my friends once came up with the idea of thinking of the ghost as a sort of djinn, and mockingly locked his broken PlayStation Portable in the closet alongside $5 as a tribute to the ghost, asking him to repair it, if he was obviously well versed in technical matters. The next evening, we were baffled to find the old, broken PSP alongside a second one, which was not brand new, but working. There had not been a second console of that kind in the flat before, and none of the rest of us had owned one in the first place. The rest of the closet was just full of old stuff stored by my friend's godfather. We concluded that one of us had chosen to get hold of a used PSP for the sole purpose of pretending that the ghost had done it. But it was unlikely given the fact that the flat was locked in the meantime, and the keys had been returned to my friend's grandfather. The djinn-like qualities didn't last though, and other attempts to exploit them, duplicating money, etc., failed altogether. The most bizarre episode consisted of the ghost apparently attempting to cook using the stove in the kitchen. One evening, we decided to sleep at someone else's place for once, and called my friend's grandpa to ask him what we should do with the keys. He said that he would need to get into his old flat the next day at 9 a.m. to get some documents, so we should be there to open the door for him. The next day we arrived there at 8:30 a.m., unlocked the main door downstairs, and were amazed to find the flat door wide open. We were certain that we had shut it and locked it in the evening. Even more bizarre was the fact that the oven in the kitchen was preheated, and some barbecue chicken wings had apparently been prepared for cooking on the baking plate. Although we had indeed bought chicken wings the day before, the pack we had brought was unopened, in the fridge where we had put it. There was no other open pack to be found anywhere. We thought that my friend's grandfather might have done this, but we were in possession of the only key, and there was no reason for a 75-year-old man to prepare himself some chicken wings at 8 a.m. anyway. We nevertheless immediately called his grandpa to ask him whether he had already been in his flat this morning. He denied this and noted that he didn't even have a key. Nevertheless, when he finally came around, he was not really shocked at all, and found it rather amusing, as if he was somehow familiar with these kinds of incidents. When we hinted at the possibility of a ghost, he laughed it off though. There were some more things along these lines that happened, but this is already way too long. There are some other legends pertaining to this school and the area around it that I might tell in the future. I no longer have access to the flat now, as my friend has moved away, and his grandfather no longer had any use for it. So it went back to the school's operator, who sold it to the government in order to house Syrian refugees. I wonder whether they have already discovered the ghost, or whatever it is. But given that the old furniture was thrown out, and the flat received a complete makeover, I doubt he would still feel at home there. I've been interested in the paranormal ever since I was a kid. I'm 33 now, reading a lot of books on the subject, and having a general curiosity about it. I admit that I haven't really had any experiences, at least not that I know of, with things like cryptids, or ghosts, or aliens, UFOs, or anything along those lines. But I try to keep an open mind about those kinds of things. And I have had some strange experiences. First off, I was asking my mom recently about imaginary friends, wondering if I had had any when I was very little. She said that she doesn't remember me having any imaginary friends, but she does remember me having animals that either I'd be terrified of or would talk to. She said that I was scared of some kind of bear-like creature that I would sometimes see under my bed, but other times she and my dad would overhear me talking to someone or something in my room. I honestly can't remember any of this, so my guess is that this all took place before I was about 5 or 6, which is about as far back as my memory goes. I do remember having a nightmare about the Beast Man from those old He-Man cartoons. Red fur and red eyes, etc. That might have some relation to the whole bear thing. Not sure when I had the nightmare, but in it, I was being stalked through my house by the Beast Man, and I went to hide underneath my bunk bed. There was an area that you could crawl into and sit down in underneath the bed, which was pretty cool, but anyways. And in my hiding spot, I looked from under the bed and then through the crack under my bedroom door, which was close to the bed. And somehow the crack widened, and there was the Beast Man, his red eyes glowing and full of hunger and malice, as the door began to disappear. Then, of course, I woke up. I'm not sure if that dream about the bear-like Beast Man has any relation to those experiences that my mom says I had when I was little, but it makes me wonder. As far as the whole talking to someone or something part, I did talk to myself a lot when I was a kid. I admit I didn't have many friends growing up, and was kind of a weird kid. But my mom says it wasn't quite like that, and that it sounded like I was really having some kind of conversation with someone or something, and both her and my dad thought it was weird. Moving on from there, I do remember a couple of times hearing my parents, or what sounded like my parents, calling my name in the middle of the night. I remember once or twice going to check and see, and peeking into the bedroom, but, of course, they were both sound asleep. I don't remember my parents ever really talking in their sleep, let alone calling out to people in their sleep. So I'm not sure what to make of that. My guess it was an auditory hallucination of some kind, but then who knows? Another weird and somewhat funny experience was when I got up in the middle of the night to use the main restroom in our house, which was just across the hall from my room, which I often did as I have a small bladder. Or so my wife tells me all the time even now. When I looked into the dark restroom, only the dim hallway light on the other end of the hallway to illuminate, I saw what looked like the silhouette of a person sitting on the toilet, and also what looked like the glowing ember of a cigarette in one of their hands. I thought it was my dad, as it kind of looked like his outline. My dad has always been a smoker, and he would sometimes smoke while in the can. It was weird, as my parents had a small restroom in their room. But then I figured something may have been wrong with their toilet or something like that. I had to go, and I just stood there waiting for him to finish. And if anyone is wondering, my dad and I are both in the habit of forgetting to, or not caring about, shutting the door behind us when we use the bathroom. Or at least when no one is around. And eventually I asked my dad, not in an angry way as I didn't want to piss him off, if he was just about finished, but got no response. I asked a couple of times but didn't hear anything. I was confused, and eventually got up the courage to step closer. But then, I couldn't see the figure anymore. I turned on the light, and no one was there. My guess is this was either some kind of optical illusion or maybe an hallucination. But looking back on it now, I think it was kind of funny. I hear all the stories online of shadow people, and though I can't say that I've had any of those classic experiences, shadow people hovering over me while I'm in bed, at least not that I can remember, I can say that I may have seen one sitting on the can in my bathroom. Another experience I had was when I had a bad ear infection. I remember I was dreaming, or I was in and out of some kind of half-sleep, half-awake kind of state. And in a lot of pain and discomfort because of my ear. And when I closed my eyes, everything was white. And there were these, white shadow figures in the white. What I mean by that is, they were a darker shade of white than the white background that I was seeing. And these white shadow figures were screaming. I remember feeling terrified and trapped in this world of white, surrounded by screaming white shadows for a time. And can't remember how it all stopped. But I guess I'll just say, I'm glad it did. My guess with this experience is it was some kind of visual auditory hallucination brought on by my ear infection, and maybe throwing in something similar to sleep paralysis for good measure. Whatever it was deeply unnerving. Another experience I had, which was even more unnerving, involved Chucky from Child's Play. Like many kids back in the 80s, I was terrified of Chucky. I remember even being scared of pictures of him on VHS tapes in the video stores. And I remember the movie coming on TV when my parents had left the TV on and forgotten to turn it off. And running into my room because I was too scared to get close to the TV to turn it off, in case he might show up on the screen. Anyways, I was having this dream, and I was down in our garage basement, which creeped me out sometimes when I was growing up, I admit. Near the garage door, in between my dad's workbench where he kept his tools and the boiler, was this little crawl space that went under the house. In the dream, Chucky came crawling out from under that crawl space and began to walk towards me with a knife in his hand. Now I remember, in the dream, he didn't really look like Chucky did in the films. He had the same basic shape, but his expression was more blank and unmoving, not animated like it was in the films. Anyways, he came toward me. I was, of course, terrified, and then woke up shaking. But then, sitting on my bed in the dark of my room, I found myself surrounded by all these fragments of images of Chucky's blank, unmoving face, swirling all around. Needless to say, I was scared shitless. I got out of my bed, trying to get away from all these images, but they kept swirling all around me. I tried turning the light on, but just my luck. The light bulb had gone out earlier that night, and my parents hadn't replaced it yet. So I tried opening the door, but my parents had locked it, because I'd come out one too many times that night to bug them, rather than staying in bed. I was freaking out, and tried looking under the door just to see the light from the hallway. but the images kept swirling around me. Eventually my parents heard me crying and banging on the door and opened the door. The images dissipated after they opened the door, and I told them what had happened, and they tried to comfort me as best they could, thinking I had some kind of really bad nightmare, and even let me sleep on the couch that night. Now, as far as that experience goes, my best guess is it was some kind of hallucination. I think I may have been sick at the time, though I'm not sure. I'd read somewhere recently about a lady having a similar hallucination where there were fragments of images floating all around her, although, strangely enough, it was apparently brought on by meds that she had been given to her before or after surgery, or something along those lines. This was the only time anything like that ever happened to me, so really I'm not sure what it was. Anyways, after that, I remember laying on the couch and daydreaming about blowing Chucky up with a bazooka or something like that, imagining myself being victorious over the monster, as boys do. And back in my early 20s, I binge-watched a bunch of horror flicks, mostly from the 80s and 90s, including the first 2 or 3 Child's Play movies. And I got over most of whatever residual fear that I had left of Chucky then. I even remember enjoying them to some extent. Or at least the first one. Anyways, that was a weird experience for sure. I had a lot of strange dreams growing, and many of them along the lines of the Beast Man that I described above. I guess I'm one of those who seems to only have dreams that are either nightmares or just bizarre. I guess I take after my dad in that way, as my mom has very normal and mundane and strangely realistic dreams. One series of dreams that I had over the course of a couple of nights, or maybe a few nights, was one about these bat-like creatures. The bat-like creatures were about the size of a human head, round and flat, with little wings that didn't look like they could really hold them up. Think bumblebees. And red eyes. In the dreams, they would often look at me through my second-story bedroom window, which I often looked out of at night. On a side note, I had a lot of dreams where something or someone would be staring at me through my window. Everything from Godzilla to Creepy Santa. In another part of my dreams, one of the bat creatures tried to come through our restroom window to attack my older sister. In yet another part of the dreams, I was in some kind of cathedral where these bats were congregated around a larger bat that I presumed was their leader. And they were doing this really weird chant. And in the last part of the dreams, I was standing looking outside of the sliding glass door leading into our backyard, and looking up into a cloudy sky, and it was filling with these bats, and I was terrified that they would break through the glass and swarm us. But all of a sudden, it began to rain stones, like small boulders knocking the bats out of the sky. I cheered in triumph and woke up, and that was the end of them. Well, at least that had a happy ending. Like I said above, I've never had any experiences with aliens, UFOs, but I've had a couple of dreams involving them. In one, I was standing alone in my backyard at night, looking up at the stars. But then, I saw these lights in the sky coming towards our house, and this deep dread filled me, and I ran. Then woke up. Do I think I've been abducted by aliens, but just don't know it? I don't think so. Or I sure as hell hope that. Those grey aliens creep me the hell out like nobody's business, I'll tell you that. But in another, I was at some kind of summer camp, and at night was looking up at the sky, and there was this multicolored spiral galaxy spinning faster and faster. It was beautiful. Kind of reminds me of the colourful UFOs in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Ending on that note, one last strange experience that I had when I was a kid, that I wanted to share, which is meaningful to me, and that I think of as something of a spiritual experience, was something that happened to me sometime between the ages of 8 and 10, or so I think, when I was looking out my window at night. Like I said above, I looked out my window a lot as a kid, especially at night. I remember I decided that I wanted to stay up all night so I could see the sunrise. Of course, at the time, I wasn't aware of the fact that I was looking in the wrong direction to see the sunrise, but anyways. I sat there for hours thinking, quietly talking to myself, wondering about life and the universe and everything. And as time went on, the sky grew a little lighter. Looking out of my window, there was a driveway and our street, and on each side of our driveway there were trees. And on each side of the sky there were these cloud banks moving toward each other. I watched for a long while as these cloud banks moved closer and closer towards each other, and the stars faded away from view as the clouds rolled more and more into my view, blotting out stars as they came through. Around 6 in the morning, at the very moment those two cloud banks met and collided into each other, and the last set of stars disappeared, a shooting star flew across the sky. Now, I know because I had been looking in the wrong direction. There was no sunrise for me to see, and I guess you could say that my seeing this whole spectacle, with those cloud banks colliding into each other and the shooting star, was just a pure chance. But I can't help but think that maybe I was the only person in all the world to witness that moment, and that maybe it was somehow meant for me. At the time, I imagine I just thought it was some cool thing, but looking back on it, I see it as something special, and all these years later, whenever I see a shooting star fly through the sky at night, it reminds me of that moment back when I was a kid, and makes me wonder, and gives me hope. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to True Paranormal Stories, Episode 6. I know it's been a little while since I did one of those, but I think we had a good haul this week in terms of stories. Nice long video, certainly. Whether or not they're scary, well, that's entirely up to your own individual perspective. What you don't find scary might be terrifying to another person, and vice versa. So when commenting, please be honest, but keep it civil. Anyway, I'm having a bad throat day to day, feeling a bit rough. So I'm going to run now and not talk for the rest of the night. I'll have to resist the urge to sing too, darn it. Anyway, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.